I switched to the honey diet where I basically overeat as much honey and sugar as I possibly can in the early part of the day. And then I was able to increase my metabolic rate so much where I could eat 3,500 calories a day. And I lost 10 pounds in a month. Isoleucine restriction induced FGF21 really strongly. And FGF21 is this factor that's also induced whenever you overeat sugar. If I just eat unlimited sugar as much as I possibly can without protein, do I just start melting off body fat? I think like an important concept is kind of viewing insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance as like cells being hungry or full.
Yeah, Anabology, can you explain to us where the hell sugar fasting and honey diet and some of this stuff came from?
Yeah, so I think that like people have actually been doing this for like quite a long time. I mean, so if you look at like Freely and Durian Rider, like these are people who have been doing like these super high sugar diets and just under the vegan kind of fruitarian sphere. But I don't think it really came into the more kind of mainstream like bodybuilder health side until like probably the past 2 years. So about a year and a half ago, I like found these studies online after kind of growing a Twitter for a little bit in like the Ray Peat space. And Ray Peat was, this guy who thought that sugar was good. He thought seed oils were bad. And he was talking about this in the 1970s after doing some aging research, way before anybody else ever even knew about seed oils. Like everybody was celebrating back in the 1970s how much soy production had grown in the US, right? So I learned about Ray Peat and kind of started a Twitter and grew in the Ray Peat space. And through that, I eventually found this study where I think it was in 2010, these scientists gave mice Coca-Cola instead of water to drink, right? And they were just eating a normal diet otherwise, but like at all times, instead of like from their little feeding tube, they get water, they get Coca-Cola. And they measured the amount of calories that they ate over this like study period. And over like a long time, the ones that had the Coca-Cola drank and ate 4 times the calories as the ones that didn't drink the Coca-Cola, that just had water. Yet at the end, they weighed the exact same. So that's like a 400% metabolic rate increase in these mice. And I'm like, why is this like not great, like insanely big news? And the study title literally just said something like, oh, soft drinks alter lipid profiles and slightly make your cholesterol like a little bit worse. So they didn't even write in the title of the paper that like they had this insane weight outcome because they were so against sugar that they had to spin it, against soft drinks in some way. So then I saw this paper where, they were drinking a ton of sugar and not gaining any weight. And I like dug more into it and found some other papers that had replicated this like in mice in the past. And at the same time, like 2023, there were these papers released by the Lambing Lab, which is like a kind of dietary protein restriction studying lab these days. And they found that when they restricted one amino acid called isoleucine in mice, they lived like 30% longer. The mice ate more and then they weighed less by the end of the study, or by, obviously when they're dead, they're weighing nothing, but like the entire time. So these seem like disparate, right? Because just having isoleucine restriction and then eating a ton of sugar and both of those like leading to weight loss don't really seem connected. But they eventually found that the linking factor between these two things, they found that isoleucine restriction induced FGF21 really strongly. And FGF21 is this factor that's also induced whenever you overeat sugar. So then they also, the other studies found, there's like a ton of studies here, right? But other studies found that like FGF21 alone was kind of responsible for these protein restriction, life extending effects, right? And then if you got rid of the FGF21 response, you would get rid of these metabolic rate increase and lifespan extending effects. So then around the same time, I also saw some papers where if you overeat sugar in humans, it induces FGF21. So it's like all the ingredients were there, right? Every side is saying that like FGF21 is induced if you get rid of protein, if you increase sugar, and then that should increase metabolic rate. But at that point, I didn't see anybody ever try it in humans. So I was like, I might as well try it, right? I might as well try this and see if I just eat unlimited sugar as much as I possibly can without protein, do I just start melting off body fat and then, feel better, if anything, because I'm coming also from a longevity perspective. So before this, I was eating kind of like a Paul Saladino type diet where I was eating fruit and, protein throughout the day. So I wasn't completely against sugar. I was looking into Ray Peat, so every once in a while I'd have a Mexican Coke. But I was only able to eat like 2,000, 2,500 calories a day without gaining weight. And then I switched to what is now known as like the honey diet, where I basically overeat as much honey and sugar as I possibly can in the early part of the day. And I put all of my protein in one meal at night. And after I eat the protein, I have no carbs. And then I was able to increase my metabolic rate so much where I could eat 3,500 calories a day, and I lost 10 pounds in a month. So it was like a really ridiculous experiment. I was literally eating a pound of honey a day, which is why it was called the honey diet. And
how did you do that? Like, did you, what if you noticed in terms of like meal frequency? I know like honey's not necessarily a meal, but like, did you literally just grab some honey every time you were hungry, or did you have it like, I'm going to have it morning and afternoon and night or something?
Yeah. So I basically had it like on my desk at work, and whenever I would have to go and do stuff, I worked in a lab at that point. If I had to go in the lab, I wasn't eating, but whenever I was basically outside of the lab, I was just constantly like snacking on it the entire day. I was literally taking like a bottle of honey, squirting it into my mouth at the beginning. I eventually found it easier to do kind of like coffee that was half honey, half coffee, and then just chug it. And it was interesting. Like I was doing, a pound of honey, and I wore a continuous glucose monitor during that time, and my blood sugar would never get above 150 with the pound of honey. The only time that it would get above 150, which is like considered, bad above that for glucose spikes, would be when I ate like less than half the calories in honey, but of dates, essentially, right? So dates, for some reason, were much more hard on my blood sugar than like even a pound of honey in one sip, essentially. Just chugging like a half pound of honey in the equivalent liquid of coffee would like not even spike my blood sugar very much.
It's interesting because I think dates and figs, I think they both have allulose, which supposedly is supposed to like help you to keep your blood sugar from going too high, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's like a ton of research saying all these like benefits of dates. I mean, I'm always like slightly skeptical of studies published on some of these like natural things, because if you look at the places where they're coming out of, like the people getting funding to study dates are usually in the Middle East, where it's like, this is our national food and we love it. And they have like some sort of naturalistic fallacy where natural is like by default better. So they're going to throw out all the data where it says something bad, and then they're just going to publish the thing where they like found a good result.
I live in Davis, California, and UC Davis is here. So like a lot of times you'll see a study and you'll see like University of Davis, and you're like, you're wondering like what their motive was with some of that. That's super interesting. So you mentioned a couple studies with mice, and has this been studied in humans yet?
Yeah. So the closest thing to this that I've seen studied in humans was actually released like after I did the honey diet, like almost like a year after. So it seems like they started the study even after we were already doing this in like the bro science sphere. But there was one study where they just gave kind of young men like a protein restricted diet overall. So they weren't even controlling for sugars versus like starch versus, like long chain fats versus like polyunsaturated fats, whatever. They just gave them protein restriction over like a month or a couple months. And they found that when they restricted protein, that their energy expenditure went up by like a lot, right? In this study, they didn't see any weight loss because as their protein restriction increased their metabolic rate, they just fed them more food. But in humans, they restricted protein, and then FGF21 was induced and their metabolic rate went up. So before this, people have studied like the hormonal responses overall, where they're like, oh, if we overfeed sugar, overfeed fat with no protein, do we see FGF21 or not, like in humans? But they'd never really looked at the metabolic rate changes. So I mean, we're really like on the cutting edge here. Like there's studies that are getting close, but nobody has made the connection to where maybe you don't want to do just starch and fat. Maybe you want to do specifically sugar or like MCTs, like liver targeting macros is kind of the key. And we can dive into that if you want.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the liver, and let's talk a little bit about like, fructose, because like some of my understanding is like fructose doesn't need insulin to get into the cell. And so if you can kind of make us aware of some of that. And it sounds like your liver health could be a really important piece of the puzzle. So I'm hearing some mentions of like choline, especially maybe on days off from the sugar fast. And I'm hearing all kinds of stuff. And you could potentially even have like collagen on the diet because it's absent, gelatin. absent of isoleucine. And so there's a lot of cool little tricks that might be coming.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think like the concept here, and the reason why I think fructose is kind of essential for weight loss on this type of diet. And fructose is half of sugar, right? So there's still some glucose in even the sugar fast with like Cole Robinson. The reason why I think it's essential is, the liver is essentially kind of like a sensory organ for how many calories you're eating, right? So if I take glucose and I eat a bunch of glucose, it kind of gets into my body, still goes to my liver, but then gets distributed in my blood. And then if my cells are insulin sensitive or insulin resistant, that determines whether it goes into the tissue or stays in the blood, right? And it distributes across the entire body. So I think like an important concept is kind of viewing insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance as like cells being hungry or full. So if your cells are already full, well, then they're just going to keep the glucose in your blood, and it's going to distribute it all across your body because your blood goes all over your body. But fructose kind of bypasses this hunger, essentially, like cellular level hunger signal, and goes directly into cells, even if they're already full. So then when you kind of eat it, it goes from your gut through the portal vein directly to your liver. So your liver sees these calories first, right? And it doesn't get into your blood. So if you eat like sugar, the levels of your fructose in your blood are much, much lower than the levels of your glucose in your blood, despite it being a 1-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio in the actual sugar. So that means it goes directly into your liver. And then if the liver is the sensory organ for how many calories you eat, if you're partitioning calories more to your liver than anywhere else, then your liver thinks you've eaten way more calories than you actually have. So then in this kind of edge case scenario where protein is restricted, and now there's a hormone that can respond to however many calories you ate and then make your entire body burn more calories, then fructose kind of tricks your sensory organ for the calories to produce more FGF21 than you actually need to burn off all the calories, and then you lose weight, right? That's the whole idea behind like why fructose specifically would work. But an important factor here is you can induce FGF21 with glucose without protein, or with starch, with any type of fat, as long as you restrict protein. But it probably just increases your hunger as much as your calorie output. So then the equation of calories in, calories out just balances out to, no change, right? Like it really has to be like liver targeting, I think, for the weight loss effects to happen naturally without restricting calories consciously.
What do you think is the deal with MCT?
Yeah, MCT is similar, right? Where if you take like long chain fats, they kind of go into these like chylomicrons and then they get distributed across the entire body, kind of like the glucose. MCT are these short chain fats that go directly into your liver, like through the portal vein, kind of like fructose. And fats aren't really or nearly as like insulin dependent as protein or sugar is. So then like MCT should pretty much work the same way as fructose does. But even like the foods kind of like coconut oil, they might be too loaded in long chain fats because they have like palmitic acid and all of these things. So it's as if you're eating maybe like sugar on top of rice, right? When you're eating coconut oil versus eating the actual like fructose or, pure sugar signal that you would get otherwise. So I think MCT could work. And I've been trying to explore ways that you could make that diet like a reality where you do like MCT and sugar together. But there's like really subtle things when it comes to like the specific FGF21 mechanism. Like you were saying with choline, right? Like you need choline to export liver fat. So the idea is if you don't have enough choline and you do this diet and maybe your liver doesn't respond enough, then you're just going to get a fatty liver and injure yourself over time with all the sugar and fructose input. But then the sources of choline that are kind of natural, like egg yolks, for example, they also have like cholesterol in them. And then it's been found that dietary cholesterol can inhibit FGF21. So then, it's like, are you just going to mess up the entire mechanism and just like actually give yourself a fatty liver by trying to add choline? Like it's like kind of tricky,
Yeah. And maybe, as Cole points out, maybe you're not in as much danger for fatty liver if you're losing weight. It seems like so many health outcomes come from like, oh shit, I lost 10 pounds. And on this diet, like, do you think from what you've seen from your own experience and from what you're hearing from other people, do you feel that this protocol, a sugar fast where you're primarily just, having, fruit and honey, maple syrup, table sugar on a diet where you're handling, having those kinds of foods, and you're doing so for maybe a few days in a row and stuff. Do you feel that it's like matching up and it's as powerful as something like Ozempic?
Yeah, so I kind of think like Ozempic and the sugar fast they're kind of like on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like I have a hunch that if you added Ozempic to like a sugar diet, it just wouldn't work as well. Because then you're just not eating enough to get the hormonal response, right? So like the way I view this is that sugar and these kind of diets where you're restricting protein and increasing your metabolic rate, I kind of view them as like hunger driven, if that makes sense. So you get this like really strong insulin sensitivity. So your cells are hungry too, and they're accepting calories. And then you're overloading yourself with calories and your body just tries to increase the metabolic rate. But then with Ozempic, you're not really signaling that you have a lot of calories. You're kind of just eating less, right? Like you're saying, I'm full, which is almost the equivalent of like insulin resistance in my view, right? Like maybe, this is like a complicated topic, right? Because people think insulin resistance is bad, insulin sensitivity is good, but I think that's like too reductive. But I think that say you do like Ozempic and you just kind of try and do like a sugar fast, but then you only eat like 1,000 calories of sugar. Well, then you're probably not eating enough carbs to spare your muscle, right? So then maybe like a better diet would be something that is actually satiating and does spare muscle a little bit more, right? Which would be, say, like a high protein diet with starches and long chain saturated fats, stearic acid, like beef and potatoes, like if you're doing Ozempic, because then when you're eating less, it doesn't really matter because you have enough protein to still maintain a bit of muscle.
Yeah, let's dive into some more stuff about. Well, I'll just finish that thought for a second before we dive into like some protein. But I have a friend, and he's on semaglutide, I guess, and he's doing sugar fasting, and he's doing variations of the sugar diet, and it kind of falls in line with what you're mentioning because he's not following it like crazy strict. Like he's doing a great job with it, but like his body fat is falling off him. This guy used to be 505 pounds,
Wow.
and now he's down in like the 350 pound range. And he's just doing great. But like as of late, since I discovered some of what Cole's been talking about and some of the stuff that's come out from some other people on sugar fasting, and shared that information with him, his weight has just been like sliding right off of him. It's been really awesome to see. And I've been encouraging him like, hey, let's make sure that we're not like restricting calories, so he's kind of working on, bringing those up. And I think because he doesn't use crazy amounts of semaglutide, I think that's why it's probably working so well for him. His hunger is not so suppressed that, he's only like having, a small amount of fruit here and there.
Right. Yeah. And I think, one thing people have reported to me is that this type of diet like allows them to be hungry again. Like some people just barely experience hunger, and despite being kind of like overweight, they just like never really feel hungry, and then maybe eating is like kind of compulsive. But then with this diet, they like are feeling just like they're like a pit in their stomach, like feeling very hungry, but then they're able to eat and get past it. And they're like, wow, this makes me happy, I guess, right? Because they're getting joy from their food again.
To me, it seems like with the protein restriction that's going on, I've said this for many years. I've talked about how, you're never going to find the protein that you need at the bottom of a bag of Doritos. And what I meant by that was a lot of times when you have absence of protein or you're protein deficient, it seems like it makes you want to eat like a crazy person. When you're deficient in protein, and protein can be pretty satiating, pretty filling, and also, in nature, so many times protein is accompanied by fat, and then those two things together seem to be the ultimate satiating bomb, because protein takes some pretty strenuous breakdown of the metabolism. And then you got the fats, which are breaking down, slower. But what I meant by that was, I felt like, people would just be ravenously hungry and they'd want to continue to snack on these foods. And there is hyperpalatability and there's all these different things going on with those foods. So there's tons of reasons why you want to eat them. But now, with some of the stuff that you're sharing, I'm like, wait a second. Maybe because there's a lack of protein, like this is like a hypothesis, and I've heard you talk about this, and I was shocked because I was kind of coming to some similar conclusions. I was like, well, maybe because the protein's restricted so much, maybe your body tends to want to burn up these calories when you're doing something like the honey diet
Mm-hmm.
in an attempt to give you more energy so you can actually go get some freaking protein.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you're probably going to die at some point. Like, is that, do you think that's like fairly accurate? And if you could touch upon, what's happening with something like rabbit starvation, because we hear that a lot. I've heard Joe Rogan talk about it, and there's people that I guess, they speculate that people, all they could find was like a rabbit and rabbits are pretty lean, not enough fat on there. But that's probably also a massive caloric restriction that they were undergoing when they were doing that.
Right. Yeah. So when it comes to like the evolutionary side of it, like why would your body respond and increase the amount of calories that you burn whenever you're like just eating only sugar, like protein deficient sources? The narrative that I've had in my head about this is that there were probably mammals or animals that were in an environment where basically all there was fruit. So if you like look at a thing of juice, like a carton of juice, and you look at the nutrient label, there is protein in there. It's like a couple grams of protein for every 30 grams of carbs. So then if you want to get a reasonable amount of protein to where like you don't have like a negative nitrogen balance, you're just, you can maintain the amount of muscle that you have, then, say you need like a gram per kilo, like minimum, the way that you would end up getting that amount of protein, if the only source of food that you had was fruits, would be to eat, if you're a human, like 6,000 calories. So then what I really think it is just that there were periods where we were around fruit, and then the animals that could adapt to eating fruit and getting protein from the fruit survived, and then the other ones didn't. So then, if you eat 6,000 calories, you'll eventually hit the amount of protein that like slows you down and makes you full, but not before then.
And it'd probably be hard to like go maybe, well, I guess, it's hard to compare, I guess, because like nowadays people have body fat, right? Mm-hmm. So can we, like, what have you found? What have you seen in terms of body fat? Like when someone burns body fat, is that like in some way similar to them having a thing of olive oil or something like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like I think there's like an interesting paradigm there where this guy Peter from the Hyperlipid blog, he's like a super interesting thinker in the diet space and fat space essentially. He's like thought about basically fat as like a source in the equations of calories out essentially. So you have like calories in, calories out. But then do your calories go into heat or energy, or do they go into your fat, right? And you can also think about the fat as kind of a food that you're eating as you're burning fat, right? So then people who have eaten like a bunch of seed oils or something, if, I don't know your stance on seed oils, but my view is that seed oils are very insulin sensitizing. So then they make your cells hungry, essentially, which is a bad thing for obesity, because you don't want your fat cells to be insulin sensitive. You want them to reject calories. So then if you are trying to lose weight and your fat cells are full of seed oils that you ate previously, well, then you become really hungry. Your cells start to accept calories again, even as they're trying to get rid of the calories by burning it. And then it's like very counterproductive to weight loss. So then there's a couple more things. You say it's like taking some olive oil. I think, yeah, it's exactly like that, right? If your fat is full of olive oil, then you're going to be taking a shot of olive oil. If it's full of other fats like long chain fats, then it's going to be like taking a shot of tallow. And then FGF21 is also induced when people are fasting, because when you're fasting, you're generally in this mode where your body is trying to spare protein. You're not trying to break down all your muscles, because otherwise it would be, you just atrophy immediately and die. So then your blood protein, like circulating amino acids, is pretty low, but your blood fats are really high, which is the perfect state for FGF21 to be induced, right? It's like a protein restricted, high calorie, high fat state. That at least in terms of what your liver sees, right? So then FGF21 is induced whenever people are fasting.
And how does fat like play into some of this? I know, like, the protocol for now is like to not have any fat, but at least from what I'm thinking, it seems like you could probably have some fat.
Right. Yeah. And I think that MCT would be the best fat to have. And after that, you could have like the slightly longer than medium chain saturated fats. And then I actually think seed oils, like I'm generally against seed oils for kind of inflammatory. And again, the reasons why I'm talking about like insulin sensitizing to your fat cells, et cetera, like those reasons. But when you're losing weight specifically, I think that seed oils would be more on mechanism in terms of like inducing FGF21 than say like a long chain saturated fat. So then, stearic acid is like the main fat that people see in like cocoa butter or tallow that they say is very satiating. But it's probably one of the weakest fats at inducing FGF21, despite it being, the most satiating and probably anti-obesogenic in a mixed macro diet.
We've been talking a lot about FGF21, and I forgot to even ask you what the hell it is.
Yeah, so FGF21, it's called Fibroblast Growth Factor 21. I don't know why it's named that originally. Probably they just isolated a protein that they made fibroblasts, which are these cells that can differentiate into a bunch of other cells like skin cells or whatever, heal wounds. They can create the extracellular matrix. They found that it maybe made those cells grow. So they call it Fibroblast Growth Factor 21, and it's a protein hormone. So what that means is people know what peptides are. They're essentially these short chains of amino acids. Proteins are essentially long chains of amino acids. So if it gets to like a level where it's hard to synthesize it chemically, people start to call it a protein generally, because then you have to like grow it in a living being. Like you have to grow some E. coli and make the E. coli make your protein for you. So it's a protein because it's a really big peptide, and it's a hormone, which means it acts at a distance. So if you have one organ that releases a signal to another organ, that's the kind of the definition of a hormone. So FGF21 is a protein hormone that's released from the liver, basically in response to a low protein, high other calorie state. So could be carbs, could be fats.
Yeah, can you explain to us too? Like I kind of have a little bit of a theory on this, but like I don't think that your body is going to want to break down protein. Mm-hmm. Like your body's not going to want to break down the protein that you already have on your body, the muscle that you have on your body. When your glucose, your blood glucose is when your blood glucose is adequate and your liver glucose is full and your muscle glycogen is full, I don't see any reason why the body would be like, yo, let's take some protein from these biceps over here and let's make some more glucose out of it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think with all these, so there's basically metabolic pathways. Like the way I think about this is the main metabolic pathway, the main just kind of railgun of metabolism is glycolysis, where every cell just takes glucose and it transforms it really fast into all of these other things. But then also there are these other pathways such as gluconeogenesis, or some pathways specific to kind of other amino acids. So the building blocks of protein that try to feed into glycolysis and then the downstream pathways. So then if you're thinking about it like this is literally like a pipe of water and there's like high pressure water streaming through this. If you have like really high pressure in the glycolysis pipe, and then you're trying to put like low pressure water through from these other pipes, like the amino acid pipe into this glycolysis pipe, well, you're not going to get much flow from the side pipe of coming from amino acids. All of your flow is going to be from this glycolysis. But then if you drop the pressure through your glycolysis, so you get rid of all the glucose and now your main pipe has nothing in it, well, then all of your flow is going to be from the protein. It's like all going to be from those other side things. And that's really how it works, right? If you have say like one enzyme and it's responsible for converting some product of amino acids into something that could be used for energy in like that's post glucose, like in glycolysis. If you have all of the product, on that enzyme, basically coming from glucose, that product directly blocks the conversion of amino acids into that energetic product. I might be overcomplicating it here, but you do directly block those pathways by having really high glucose over time. So you should spare protein unless unless your blood glucose is really low and your cells, the glucose in your cells, which is an underrated aspect, right? Because if you can measure blood glucose, but if your cells are really insulin sensitive, then your cells are even more full of glucose than you would expect based on your blood glucose. If both of those are really low, then you're going to start churning through protein for sure.
And then there's a couple other things to consider, for those listeners that are really getting after it and they really want the gains and they're training really hard in the gym. then maybe, you know, sugar fasting is something that you just use sparingly. You know, you just use it like twice a week, or you use it on occasion just to like, just to cut a
Yeah.
little bit.
Well,
The reason why I mention that is like there's some people that are training very, very hard
mhm.
and they're making their muscles very sore. So it's very clear that there's some like, you know, there's some breakdown of the protein. And then therefore that person, we could just speculate that maybe they do need more protein because they are in a phase where they're trying to grow and expand. And so my point in bringing that up is like, you know, maybe don't do 12 sets of legs when you're really trying to hone in body fat loss. And when you're, you know, so maybe you still train legs, you do some lunges, and I think Cole's recommendation to do like body weight exercise and stuff makes a lot of sense. And we all want to try to minimize that muscle mass loss because one of the points of this diet, at least from what I'm seeing so far, is we're trying to increase your metabolic rate. And I don't really think there's been a diet in the past that I've seen that has a focus of kind of ratcheting up your metabolic rate. There have been some diets where people have kind of said, oh, let's try a reverse diet. You know, they'll bring somebody down to some really low caloric amount, and then they bring them back up for a few weeks. And before the body kind of catches up to, I guess, sort of like recognizing, you know, how much calories you bumped up, you're not going to get fat. People do that for like 2 to 3 weeks sometimes. So there's all these kind of different strategies, but this diet in particular, from what I'm seeing, it seems like it gives you some extra play with calories. And I believe there was a study done, and I think it was done in humans that someone sent me. And I apologize, I don't remember like what the heck it was called or anything, but what stood out to me, and Ryan, maybe you have it over there, but like what stood out to me was it seemed like there was a discrepancy of like 500 to like 800 calories extra that someone can consume. Do you know that study I'm trying to reference, or do you know anything about that in particular?
I don't know about that study in particular. I mean, I do know that, say, like, just as an aside, like there's the studies like on the Biggest Loser people who essentially just do a really calorie restricted diet and over exercise to like really cut weight super fast for a show, and it works. But then people have studied these people for years later, and their metabolic rate has decreased by like the magnitude that you're saying, right? For even years after that. And then they usually gain all of the weight back, and their metabolism is even slower at that same high body weight. So it does seem like there are, you know, there's like some flexibility, at least in the down direction, that's pretty well acknowledged, but in the up direction is like a pretty novel concept.
You also mentioned there was you mentioned a study that was done on mice on your YouTube channel, where the mice didn't lose any muscle mass, but I forget how long you said the study was. Can you share some of that with us? 'Cause I thought that was really compelling.
Yeah, so the study, they basically fed these mice different percent protein diets, so 0 to 18%, and they looked at them for just 1 week, right? And the mice, they all started with around 7.5 to 8 grams of fat on them. And the 18% protein mice, by the end of it, had no change in body fat. They ended with about 7.5 or 8 grams of fat. And then the ones that had 0% protein for 1 week, they ate the same amount of food, yet they ended with only 2.5 grams of fat. So they lost almost all of their body fat. And then if you do the calculation, because they don't share the raw data, but they have enough kind of variables around it. If you do the calculations to see how much lean mass they lost, it looks like they lost none or even gained lean mass over the time. There's no way they gained, right? So they lost 0 lean mass over this entire week. But yeah, I want to bring that back to like one thing. It's like kind of the difference between the honey diet specifically, and then kind of the Cole Robinson ideas here in regards to muscle and working out. So I've done kind of like a deep dive on the literature in like the amount of protein intake that people kind of need to be able to gain muscle, and like where it kind of plateaus. And this is like a debated topic probably for the past like, you know, 5 decades, right? So, but it looks like you can kind of maintain like a neutral or decent protein balance, or even positive protein balance if you're working out well, at around 1 to 1.5 grams per kilo of like protein. So for like a 70 kilo male, it's like 70 grams of protein to 120 grams of protein. So with that, I kind of do that with the honey diet, where I have my first part of the day have basically only sugar as macros and maybe a little bit of protein, but only from fruits. And then my entire dinner is like 100 gram, 120 gram of protein dinner, right? And then if you look at any data that's available for how long protein or fats last in your blood, it's usually about like 12 hours before it goes back down to baseline, before your insulin resistance is like kind of reset, because protein induces insulin resistance transiently and elevates your blood glucose. It takes about 12 hours for your metabolism to kind of reset. And then for sugar, if you eat it in isolation, your blood sugar spikes over within like 2 or 3 hours if you have good glucose tolerance. So then what this suggests is that you can divvy up your day into 2 portions where you have like a 12-hour of protein refeeding window and then a 12-hour FGF21 protein deficient window. And as long as you have the protein window during your sleep when you're inherently fasting, you can basically be eating all day and still have this protein deficient state and still get your daily need for protein, right? And this is like equivalent to essentially 1 meal a day, but you're adding sugar in the fasting period, right? So, like, I think for like a long-term thing, like there's like 2 perspectives, right? Like Cole Robinson, the idea is maybe you can put these days of sugar fasting throughout your week and just cut on those days, and the rest of the days, maybe you gain a little bit of weight or you just calorie restrict. But my idea is that you could do this, you could do kind of like a spectrum within one single day, where maybe you do the fruit till noon that like Noah Ryan does. If you want to be just like maintain weight, if you want to lose weight more aggressively, you could still get all of your protein to maintain your muscle, but then put all of your protein restriction in the beginning part of the day. And then you could do that every day. And just, that's like the way that you eat now. Or, you know, you could go back and forth between all of these possible ones, where you do a sugar fast, where you do halfway through the day, you start eating your protein, where you do one day where all you're eating is satiating foods. But the key is to separate them. I think you just have
what would you say like is something to not do? You know, so like, let's say, you know, you have a bunch of people and they're following your protocol. They're eating, you know, mainly fruits and stuff like that till noon. And then, you know, in the evening they have, you know, some protein and they have a starch, or something like that. On a day where they're maybe not following your protocol, like, are there any don'ts to do? Because what I have a little concern over, and where my mind starts to go, is like, hey, let's make sure we don't keto this thing. Let's make sure we don't carnivore this thing. You know, some of us, you know, recklessly said, hey, eat as much meat as you want. Or we said, hey, eat as much fat as you want. And people are like putting butter, on top of cheese, on top of bacon, and making a bacon butter cheese sandwich or something like that. And it was excessive, right? And we know like excessive isn't great. But also what happened on ketogenic diets and a carnivore diet, something that is rarely talked about. And that is, people tend to cheat on the diet. And when you cheat on the diet, your macro split by the end of the month, if you cheat like twice a week or something like that, your macro split at the end of the month is probably going to look very similar, potentially, to the standard American diet. So that's some of my concern is, you know, if people just kind of have free reign to do what they want, maybe they'll make some errors. So is there anything that you could think of, like from a cautionary perspective, you can think of like, hey, you know, I don't think it's a good idea to do like A, B, and C?
Yeah. So I think that the main thing is that if you are eating a mixed macro meal, so if you're doing like 30% protein, 40% carb, 40% fat, like around that kind of middle range where you're eating all the macros, you absolutely have to calorie restrict. There's like no way around that, right? People have studied this for like a very long time in animals and even in human interventional trials. If you're eating a standard American diet, right, where you're eating like this high fat, high carb, high sugar, high protein diet, you're going to get fat, right? So you can even do this on 1 meal a day, right? If you fast, which is like the lowest calorie possible state you could have, and then you just eat like a 4,000 calorie dinner, well, you're still going to gain fat. Like there's no way around that. So then the thing not to do is to overeat when you're eating mixed macros. Like I do believe that if you're eating only sugar, you can eat as much as you want and you're not going to gain weight.
You mean that, like as much as you want?
As much as you want, yeah.
Rip it and just go for it.
But people don't know what sugar is too, right? People think a donut is sugar. People think like a piece of cake is sugar. It's like not sugar, right? That's fat. It has protein in it. It also has carbs. So like when I say sugar,
what sugars are you talking about specifically that people could just eat literally as much as they want?
Just pure sugar, no protein, no fat. It would have to be something refined. So it could be honey, maple syrup, like pure cane sugar. Even with fruits, you end up hitting that point, like the evolutionary point where say you've eaten 6,000 calories and now you've hit your 120 grams of protein just from fruit alone. And then now your metabolism slows down, right?
So we all need to run to the store and buy some high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, pretty much. Got a Coke right here.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. I think everyone's, people have different reaction to this diet, especially it being called sugar fasting and sugar diet, honey diet, and so forth. Especially, the sugar, the sugar being in the title, I think is really gets people emotional, But, I do find it interesting because like my knee-jerk reaction, my brother's knee-jerk reaction, a couple other people that I spoke to, as they start talking to you about it and you're explaining it to them, they're like, well, of course you don't want to eat too much candy. It's like, well, yeah, like you want to be cautious with candy because of your teeth and like, there's maybe there's dye in it and stuff like that, but actually you can probably get really shredded off of eating primarily and this is all fat-free candy that we're talking about. This isn't like the Snickers bars, peanut butter cups and stuff. But Joe English on Instagram.
Yeah, Joe Bindley. Yeah. You're going to talk to him, right? He's been doing like a 95% candy diet for a while, and he's just like ridiculously shredded.
It's one of the most ridiculous builds that you'll see. I mean, you can't really get more shredded and have more muscle than what he's done. Now, that's not proof of anything, but that is a person that's actually doing it. And he does have a following, and some of the people are following what he's doing. So can this be done like with these just like shitty sugars?
I think it can. I think there are arguments over time that like some people might end up getting these like subtle B vitamin deficiencies, and then you mess up your liver. And blood work, like after these diets, if you're just doing like the really high candy diet, like it doesn't look like super great, despite it leaning people out, from what I've seen, unless you're getting like a really nutrient rich diet where you're kind of still doing this like protein dinner even every couple of days, and you're still getting fruits and all these things. Like if you're just doing refined sugar, I haven't seen positive effects for like blood work, but I have seen positive effects for body composition. Does that make sense?
For yourself, do you have any go-to things like that you really like to eat? For myself, I'm finding that smoothies are working really well, but sort of like in an effort to do what you're talking about, dilute the protein. I'm using like fruit juice, and then I'm also using refined stuff like sugar, honey, maple syrup, things like that.
I mean, I literally drink like a lot of sodas these days to stay on it, and a lot of honey. I think that like fruits, one thing that has been great recently is my girlfriend has made a bunch of fruit spring rolls. So just like take some rice paper, put like 5 different fruits in them, and then just have like a giant bin of those and snack all day. Like that's a pretty good way to do it. Also, an interesting thing is that if you so agave is like 80% fructose and 20% glucose. And then rice, of course, is 100% glucose because it's starch. So if you take agave and have a little bit more calories of agave than you do in rice, and you mix those together, then that's like essentially the exact same macros as pure sucrose, right? So agave plus rice is sugar.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. I know that Joe English, he suggested to me post workout because he thinks like, if you're gonna have your starches, it's really good to have them like post workout because of what we talked about earlier, how the starches, they need a little bit of insulin, and post workout, being a prime time for that. He mentioned mixing corn flakes with, he said chocolate corn flakes, but he said frosted flakes, chocolate frosted flakes with rice. And I was like, that sounds like crazy. And then he wanted me to mix a protein shake up and dump that on there. And so I tried his recommendation. I was like, this sounds so weird. And it was like the greatest tasting thing of all time. It was so good because it had like, rice is really good, but if you ever have like crunchy rice, that stuff is just like at a sushi restaurant or something like that. It's unbelievable. So it was really good. It sounded wacky and weird, but it was delicious.
Oh, and one more, like the tastiest drink that I've ever had. Like I hated it the first like 3 times that I had it, and then afterwards I got hopelessly addicted and just have it constantly. It's a tart cherry juice 1-to-1 with coconut water. Just like beautifully tasting. I don't know how to describe it. It has like so many nutrients too. Makes you feel calm because of the tart cherries. Really
Any
like it.
fruits to like avoid? I know sometimes people talk about bananas. People talk. I mean, you were going to say something about fruit too, and then I think you got sidetracked talking about something else.
Oh, I mean, some fruits can be like problematic sometimes. Like, I mean, dates were really weird with like the super high blood glucose and maybe like higher insulin response than others. And over time, like if you have too much exposure to insulin, that can reduce your FGF21 response as well. So that's why fructose is good because it's not very insulin promoting. So you can kind of maintain the FGF21 sensitivity and response for longer. But so like certain ones like dates I've found to be problematic for some people. If they go above like a half pound of dates in a day, they just stop losing any weight at all. Mangoes, dried mangoes specifically. So I think fresh mangoes are usually fine for people, but dry mangoes for some reason stop up people's digestive system and they just like make them constipated. And I've like never seen somebody lose weight on a diet that makes them constipated. So
Right.
So it's just like tougher with fruits because there's like all these other variables in them than just like
Bananas?
pure sugar. I mean bananas, I was like against bananas before because, there's weird things about them where they have like high levels of serotonin and just weird stuff in them. They're like a bastard fruit that shouldn't exist in nature. We just like created them and it's like they're all clones of each other.
What's it mean they have serotonin? What's that? What does that mean?
So they literally have like you know in the rape heat space, people think of serotonin as like a stress hormone. And there have been these studies where people eat bananas and they're misdiagnosed for like malignancies for cancer because certain cancers release a ton of serotonin and kind of like as this stress response throughout the entire body as well. Like the rest of the body releases it. So people have been misdiagnosed for cancer because they ate too many bananas and the bananas raise their blood serotonin. So it's like it's just like a weird thing. So if you view like rape heat as correct, where you think serotonin is a stress hormone because it, in at least transiently is like protective to neurons and causes cells to proliferate, which is what you want in stress, but maybe you don't want it chronically. Then maybe bananas are literally just these stressed out organisms that shouldn't exist because we just made them too big and too amorphous when before they used to be these tiny things in nature. We've just like played God and created these bastards of nature.
Are there some things that are there some cautionary tales within some of the diet that you and I are talking about? Like, is there some things people should watch out for? We did say, hey, you can eat as much as you want of some of these certain types of sugar, but like somebody that's coming from a carnivore background or a keto background, if all of a sudden they slug down like 700 grams of sugar in a sitting, like maybe that's not a great idea.
I think there's two things. So one is there's a weird psychological component that happens in some people where this is like the first time that they've let themselves binge on food in like years to where they just can't control their binging anymore. So I know people have done the honey diet and this is the first time that they're able to just eat as much sugar as they want, but then they go and then they have as much beer as they want at dinner and then they have 100 donuts the next day because they just like can't handle even giving themselves like a little bit of a, the room there to binge. So then it obviously doesn't work for them because they're not doing the diet anymore. They're just binging on standard American food. So that's one thing. And then a second thing is this is like pretty rare, but I've seen people who don't seem to have the maybe right FGF21 genetic phenotype. So FGF21 increases the metabolic rate, but another thing that it does is it makes you aversive towards sweets. So if I eat like 1,000 calories of sugar in one sitting, by the end of it, I'm going to be like, I don't really want any more sugar until like 5 minutes later. Right. But like immediately I get this kind of aversion where it just like stops tasting good. I found some people where they can just eat unlimited and it never stops tasting good. And that's actually a sign that they have an FGF21 polymorphism because FGF21 signals for that feeling essentially. Like it tells you, hey, you've eaten enough sugar, like calm down for at least a second. But yeah, some people just like don't get that. Then they eat past it and then they still gain weight even on like nearly pure sugar.
Yeah. So far for myself, I'm really enjoying the diet a lot. I do like stuff that's sweet, but I also, when I'm having these smoothies or eating some Sour Patch Kids and some of these other things that I might do, after a while, my tongue just kind of gives me a signal like, hey man, we're done. We're tapped out. I don't think it's almost like eating something spicy to a certain degree where you're like, all right, my nose is running, my eyes are watering. Like I got plenty of spice going on, and you're trying to, blow your nose and all that kind of stuff that's going on when you're doing that. So it kind of reminds me of that. What are some things that, some people sometimes have digestive issues. How are you maybe coaching or suggesting, what should they do, in that case, and maybe like what's happening with some people? Because some people are having, like loose stool and stuff like that.
I think for the loose stool aspect, if you eat a fairly consistent diet, which is, I think you could do it on the honey diet, but maybe not on the sugar fasting version, like the Cole Robinson version. Because with Cole Robinson version, you're changing your diet every 3 days, but on the honey diet, you eat the same thing every day. I find that people adapt after like a week usually. So then if you're just like having like loose stools, like diarrhea as your main issue, after just a week of the diet, it should fix itself. Some people have worse issues with kind of like bloating and gas and like burping. And sometimes there are problematic fruits that don't work super well for those like specific people. And then they actually do better, not even doing honey with like literally refined cane sugar. It's like sometimes like less problematic. And then, I mean, like, yeah, the bacterial overgrowth in the gut, it's like a hard problem for some people. It's like some people, their gut bacteria are just like so well adapted that no matter what diet they do, they're still going to keep having these issues. And that's like a really hard problem that I haven't seen anybody solve yet, like just on like a wide scale, right? Like what we're doing is we're trying to find diets that can keep people lean while they're eating what they want to eat, right? But I haven't seen anybody find a way where people can make their gut bacteria be perfect no matter what they want to eat, except maybe Joel Green, like closest person. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, there's a company, Layer Origin, that has built off of Joel Green's work, where they have the prebiotics that are from the human breast milk, and that might be helpful to supplement on the diet if you're trying to keep the gut diversity. But yeah, I don't think there's like good solutions that exist yet for people who like have these persistent gut issues.
Joel Green is unbelievable. People check him out. Check him out on Instagram. He's got great information. Joel's been a good friend of mine for many years now, and he actually helped me. I had some lactose intolerance, and he recommended that human milk that you were talking about. I think it's called HMO. Usually has a supplement, right?
Yeah. Layer Origin's a cool company. They sell the HMOs based on Joel Green's work. They originally started with just the 2-fucosyl lactose, which is like the one that was easier to get, that has like a lot of data behind it. But now they have ones that have like all of the different oligosaccharides that are found in human milk that are meant to start the immune system of babies while they're breastfeeding.
Does keto, the way that it's supposed to be done, kind of like a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, does that cause any insulin resistance?
So I think it can. So my model generally of insulin resistance is there's like many stages until you get to the pathological insulin resistance. So I think what happens is people eat a bunch of food essentially, and then over time they start to store fat in their visceral adipose tissue. And I'm pretty confident that visceral adipose tissue is causative of like for diabetes and insulin resistance, because there have been papers where people just like mechanically like liquefy the visceral adipose tissue and they reverse diabetes. Like this has happened before, where like you get rid of insulin resistance just by getting rid of the visceral adipose tissue. So people get this like organ fat after they eat too much for too long, or have these other metabolic damages that prevent them from metabolizing their calories. And then the fat inside of cells is stored in these like macroscopic structures that you can see under a microscope even, called lipid droplets, right? It's just like this big ball of fat. And over time, as like the cells grow and the ball of fat gets bigger, fats just like stochastically, randomly leak off of that ball of fat. And then they go into your blood, or they go into the fat cell, and the fat cell tries to use it for energy, or the other cells try to use it for energy. So once you have enough visceral adipose tissue, especially, or just adipose tissue in general in your whole body, your free fatty acids in your blood and your fats go so high that it's as if you're eating all the time. And then since you're eating all the time, all your cells become full all the time, right? They have too much exposure to these fats and to this energy that they start to resist insulin, because they're like, hey, we're full because of this constant caloric input. So then you see insulin resistance as the marker that tells you that you have diabetes. But the real bad thing that's happening is that you have this excessive accumulation of lipid droplets that are mechanically straining your cells. And then if the fat inside of these lipid droplets is a fat that's easily damaged, like from polyunsaturated fats like seed oils, then you get this perpetual inflammation and oxidative stress that is characteristic of diabetes. But you can have insulin resistance without, like, transiently, without going through this entire process, just by eating enough calories, and then your cells start to resist insulin. So it's known that in pre-diabetics, diabetics, even healthy people, if you eat a bunch of protein, your insulin rises in healthy people. And in diabetics, the people using insulin, because this is the only group of people it's studied in, they need much more insulin to reduce their blood sugar the same amount, which means that protein immediately makes your cells more insulin resistant, which in my model on the cellular level means that they're full. But that's not a bad thing, because if you just put all of the calories into your cell at once, they would be all stressed out. There would be too many, just literally electrons floating around. They would start to produce fat, and then you would get these other issues, right? So, so insulin resistance, I think I'm straying from your original question. If you could remind me what your question was, but
No,
but insulin resistance, like on a transient time scale, is like a perfectly great physiological response where, say, if you do keto, I think this is your question, right? Does keto cause insulin resistance?
correct.
If you do keto with saturated fats, like these fats that I think make you more satiated, acutely you become insulin resistant, which is a good thing, because now the calories stay in your blood, and then if it's sugar that's high in your blood, you can pee it out, or eventually your cells are ready for the calories once you become hungry again. And once they become hungry again, and then they metabolize the calories perfectly on their own time, and everything works perfectly. However, if you eat way too many calories chronically, you will become, and of the wrong fats, like say fats that make you inappropriately insulin sensitive, which I think the seed oils do. Keto can make you insulin sensitive even transiently and over time, but then eventually you get diabetes. So yeah, I think it's like too reductive to say that keto does one or the other. It can work perfectly, and it can also give you diabetes if you just do it wrong. It's kind of hard to answer.
And what about like on the same note? What about like carnivore, or a step in a direction of like, I guess it doesn't really matter that much whether you're low carb, but thinking about people that like are trying to diet, they're trying to do something good, they're trying to be on carnivore, because carnivore, the biggest difference between carnivore and keto is like, real keto is supposed to have a lower protein protocol, as opposed to carnivore, where you're kind of just eating, large amounts of meat a handful of times a day to kind of like your satisfaction. And a lot of, people that lift are having, maybe they're going, 1 gram per pound in terms of their how much protein they're consuming, and in some cases they might be going even higher than that. They might be doing 1.5 grams of protein per every pound of muscle they have.
Yeah, which is like not ketogenic, right? If you look at Mike Baker and you look at his blood glucose, it's like almost pre-diabetic sometimes. He'll like lift a little bit and is like,
yeah.
So yeah, not Mike, yeah, Sean Baker. Too much politics. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, Sean Baker. If you do like high protein, like carnivore, yeah, you're definitely not in keto. I think that doing like the low protein in keto, so like really high fat, like moderate protein over time, you do get some FGF21 response going back to that, because again, you can induce the FGF21 with just any calorie while protein is low. And yeah, I think that's like probably why it just works better. Like past any insulin or blood sugar dependent mechanisms, it's like probably just that you're more metabolically responsive. Your metabolic rate can change more whenever you have low protein. And I think, so, okay, back to the question of, can you have both like the sugar and fats in the low protein phase? It's like hard. And I wish more people would experiment with this and just like publish the results online, like go on Twitter, post your results on high fat, high sugar, low protein, or on YouTube, just anywhere. Because there's also this concept called the Randall cycle. And the Randall cycle is kind of where, you have, say you have like glycolysis, and then you have like the fatty acid metabolism, which go through completely different pathways. And if you have a ton of fats, you inhibit glycolysis. And if you have a ton of sugar, you inhibit the fatty acid metabolism. So just inherently, it seems like there might be some competition between them. And if it isn't like super efficient, then just fats and sugar alone could compete with each other and then cause your metabolic rate to be slower if it's not responsive enough. But it's unknown if the Randall cycle is just a priority thing, where like if I have a bunch of fats, my fats inhibit my sugar metabolism. So then maybe my cells just want to metabolize fats first, and then after that they'll get to the sugar that's in my blood. So I don't know if it's just an order thing or if it's like a true competition thing where it's saying you can't have either one at the same time and your metabolism isn't going to respond to, say, the sugars that should raise your metabolic rate. So this is something that people like should test, I think, and just post online to see if it works or not, because I'm not aware of anybody who really has.
I think, for myself personally, my own experience, I had such great success utilizing, a paleo style diet. I've had a ton of success utilizing a keto diet, and I had some success in utilizing a carnivore diet. But it got to be really hard for me to lose weight. I lost weight from 330 pounds down to where I'm at today, which is around 210. So I lost an incredible amount of weight, and most of it was keto, and then sometimes I would eat like little bits of fruit and stuff like that here and there, and a lot of it was like actually like doing a keto diet and not overdoing the protein and stuff like that. But over the last couple of years, when I found out about carnivore, I was like, oh my god, I love meat, so this is perfect, and I'll do that. And again, I had success utilizing that diet, and I think that diet and that protocol can work really well for some people. I just think that when you start to really drive that protein up is when you can run into, again, my own experience for myself, I ran into some insulin resistance to where it just got to be very hard to lose weight. And I was scratching my head because I'm trying to eat less, or I'm trying to have one meal a day. And I'm like, I'm a pretty big guy. Like, I should definitely be able to eat more calories than that. And then also I found myself like really craving a lot of stuff, and I would want to eat like Quest bars and Legendary bars and all these things that are in this like gray area that I probably shouldn't eat. But now, with this style of diet, I don't feel like I have those same, a lot of those cravings are eliminated. But anyway, just back to the question is, do you think carnivore, from what you're seeing, do you think that can pose some issues with some insulin resistance?
Yeah, I think so. It seems like it would be really easy to get into a setting where the protein inhibits a metabolic rate increase that fat could give you without the protein. So then what you'll end up doing over time is like putting on that fat into visceral adipose tissue when you can't metabolize it quickly, right? Because I think it would lower the metabolic rate compared to just pure keto. And then eventually that causes insulin resistance via whatever mechanism. So like, I definitely think that it could be problematic. And I mean, I've done like carnivore diet before, and it like helped me with like migraines. Like I felt like pretty decent, but I was just like so tired, and I lost like hundreds of pounds of strength in the gym on like multiple lifts, just like while I was on the carnivore. That came back after I added carbs back in. So it seems like some people are able to get through that, but I know a lot of people who just can't, where like they just cannot get enough energy, on carnivore.
I want to reiterate too that, again, I'm not shitting on any of those diets. Those are all protocols that I think work great. I'm not trying to paint those in any bad light. But what I think is important when somebody is trying to do something in an effort for their health, and we're still trying to figure out this honey diet, sugar fasting thing. We're still trying to figure this out, like what's healthy, what's unhealthy. And I think, in carnivore and keto, it's just nice for people to be aware going in, like, hey, you could cause this problem to happen. However, like, since we know what the problem might be, maybe there's some ways that we can work around some of those problems. Because you could just, with a carnivore diet or something like that, you could easily have some breaks. You could eat some potatoes here and there. You could, maybe make sure you're not overdoing your fats. Like, there's a lot of strategies that you could think of, or you could have, days where you just eat a little bit less protein. You can macro cycle. Like, there's a lot of ways that we can do a carnivore diet for a very long period of time and have amazing health outcomes. And same with keto, and same with the other diets and stuff too. So I just want to make that clear, because sometimes people are like, I thought you were all in on carnivore. I thought they they get upset with me. But I'm not, I'm not ditching those things, because there's also a potential possibility, at least, from some of the stuff I have been gathering over the last couple of years, that this is a little bit of a seasonal, maybe this is a seasonal diet, and the sun's coming out this time of year. I know you've been doing this diet for a while, but have you noticed anything with that? Like when the sun starts to disappear and it gets colder out, do you go into a cave and eat less carbs?
So, it's kind of funny because I think I've actually been like on and off the diet in different times, because sometimes I just want to eat like a normal human being. And sometimes like I want to stay on it. So I've like done the basically same diet to like lose weight multiple times and then just kind of eat, a different diet. And the times that I've lost the most weight have been in winter, which is, kind of weird. But one of the original studies that kind of put me onto this diet was one in the 1980s, where before this 2010 study where the mice drank 4 times the calories of Coca-Cola and didn't gain any weight. This actually happened once in the 1980s before as well, where they had mice that drank Coke instead of water again. And in this case, they drank 2 times the calories and didn't gain any weight. But they also found that these mice had cold resistance. So their metabolic rate increased so much, and they had like a really high body temperature, rise, so they could tolerate cold much better. And I used to live like up in the North Country, New York, kind of by the Canadian border, where it was like -30 outside. And I would just like be going outside in a t-shirt, like with a Coke, and, feeling pretty great. And like sleeping at night with like, I don't know, below 60 degrees in my house. My girlfriend hated it. So she's happy that we moved somewhere warmer now, but no, so like, I think it works in the winter, but there are some arguments that like maybe certain fruits seasonally are better in the summer, because like that's when they naturally would occur. But what I was eating up there was fruits that, did occur a lot in the winter. So like I would have sometimes like apples, apple juice, tart cherries, like these things that you could preserve and have into the winter if you were just like a northerner in a hunter-gatherer tribe, like way back then.
What's your main recommendation with your diet, with the honey diet? Like what is specifically like on the menu for the honey diet? And then do people kind of pop in and out of it a little bit? Because you're mentioning like you like to have some freedom here and there with your own eating. Like what do you recommend?
Yeah. So I have like a post on this. So originally I posted this on my website called longastlevers.com, and it's like longastlevers.com/honey-diet is the URL to get to it. And it has essentially like the whole day of eating in the menu. Generally, that's like the most conservative possible version. But really, what I just recommend is literally just choose some fruits that you like. Choose some sugar sources like sugar in your coffee, honey, maple syrup. Choose the ones that you like, and then try it. And then if it doesn't work, then we can kind of like tune from there. Like maybe lower the starches in your fruits. Try some like lower glycemic load fruits. Like move over to pears instead of dates, for example. And but like the main thing that I see failing for people isn't just like the choice of food. It's kind of like the compliance, where you just get tired of eating a ton of sugar over time, right? So you really need to have something that is like your staple that you like, and that will allow you to do it for the most like consistent, and effective version, I guess. But then for going off of it and going onto it, I think like the cheat days are honestly, for certain people it's a good thing. For certain people who, if they binge like a little bit, they'll just like binge forever. It might be a bad thing, right? So that's like a psychological question. But it is good on this diet that you don't lose water weight, from what I've seen, at least on the honey diet, where you have like the protein dinner. I don't see people losing very much water weight, to where if you go on a weekend and you eat like a standard American diet, as long as you calorie restrict, where you don't eat like 6,000 calories of donuts or whatever in a day, on these days where you're not doing the diet, you're not going to have like the huge water weight fluctuations that you get when cheating on a keto diet. So it's actually kind of like more sustainable to cheat on a honey diet than these other diets where you'll have like a 5-pound gain and then you'll freak out. Then you have to go through the keto flu again to get back on. So yeah.
If you have access to like a really good amount of food, you were basically saying, unlimited in terms of these simple sugars, and you're having a piece of meat every night and a starch, it's like okay, I didn't say you could have pizza, okay, I didn't say you could have, ice cream or chips or something like that, but that's pretty reasonable. That's a pretty, and you can lose weight that way. Like I think that's a very reasonable plan. For myself, I've noticed that like, I really love those days. So right now, just because I'm trying to get down to 200 pounds, I weigh about 210, 211, because I'm still trying to sink my body weight down. I'm doing like 2 sugar fasting days, and then I'll do a day like you're talking about, like a honey diet style, where I have the sugar, throughout the morning time, and then the evening I'll have the lean piece of meat, and I'll have some starch. And even on that day, so far, I'm still keeping my fats pretty low. But I just find that is like, to me, that's like exciting, but maybe I'm too nerdy and maybe I've been trapped inside diet land for too long. But because the calories are high, and because my palate and my brain gets to have something sweet often, I feel occupied enough to where I'm not bored with my food, to where I've only been doing this for about 8 weeks. So, let's see what happens when I've been doing it for 8 months. My tune might change a little bit, but this is feeling great. I'm loving it. And the response from the comment section of YouTube has been absolutely ludicrous. I've been putting out content for so long, and, I'd have fans and people that are positive. But a lot of times I'm just getting like slayed. A lot of stuff is like real negative. This response, especially on my YouTube channel, has been just so massively positive. It's been unbelievable. And then again, seeing the weight loss from people has just been like astonishing. It's been really, there's some people that stall. There's some people that are stuck. There's some people that have gut issues and so forth, and probably going to take them a while to find their footing. And it may turn out that this diet's not for them at all, which is fine too. But it's helping so many people. And so I think this is an amazing time. And like you were saying about the research, we're only kind of scratching the surface of the research, and hopefully there's more studies and more things to back it up. I think it does help. It's helpful to have the science. It's helpful to have like what does this actually do? I think it's going to turn out that FGF21's a player, but I think there's going to be like 3 or 4 other cascades going on. There's going to be a bunch of other players that we just haven't even, where we'll look back and we'll be like, oh, of course, how did I not realize that was part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty freeing to be able to eat tasty foods all day.
Any other concerns that you can think of in terms of any organs or like heart health, glycation, kidney? Is there any blind spots that we have because maybe people haven't been doing this diet for that long yet?
Right. So I tested originally like my blood before and after the diet, and I looked at like fructosamine, which is kind of a glycation product that's kind of like hemoglobin A1C, that is also more dependent on other sugars like fructose or it also includes glucose, but some other sugars as well. And before and after the diet, hemoglobin A1C and fructosamine were both like perfect. Nothing was bad. The uric acid is also a factor that people talk about whenever they talk about fructose, because they say it can cause gout if you have too much uric acid from fructose metabolism. And I tested my uric acid, and it was also totally fine after I did the original honey diet. So I mean, with just like the blood markers, I think are something that people should be tracking, because you can tell, like with the concern specifically of glycation, right? Like do a month of the honey diet or the sugar fast, and then test your hemoglobin A1C. And you can go to Walmart and you can get a finger prick these days that tells you your hemoglobin A1C, and that'll tell you your average glycation over a month. So if your hemoglobin isn't glycated, you're not going to have to worry about your arteries being glycated over time, right? Like all of your proteins are going to be glycated similarly, right? So, when it comes to that, when it comes to your kidneys, uric acid, like all these things, like you can test markers and just like make sure that they're not slipping. So test your ALT, AST, your liver markers, test your EGFR, your kidney, filtration rate, test your uric acid, test your hemoglobin A1C, and then just see, right? Because I mean, I could say these recommendations, but then if your genetics are a little bit different, well, then maybe for you, you're going to be the edge case, right? So just like don't be the edge case. Just test, see if it happens to you.
Do you think like a bodybuilding style diet do you think bodybuilders, because they seem to be utilizing their carbohydrates really well, and I'm not just talking about like the enhanced bodybuilders, but just even recreational bodybuilders that are on a bodybuilding style diet. Just to define it quickly, I would say bodybuilding style diet, someone goes about 1 gram per pound of body weight or lean mass for their protein, and then their carbohydrate count is usually fairly high. It might be like double their body weight or close to that. And then their fats, though, their fats are usually very under control. Like a lot of bodybuilders, you know, even a male that's my size or someone that's 220 or 230, they're going to have probably even less than, it'd probably be like 75 or 50 to 75 grams of fat maybe for some of these guys. So do you think that they're able to kind of like circumvent some of these potential issues with insulin resistance? Because they're constantly training, but they're also constantly training their insulin sensitivity with the carbohydrates, and then they don't have the influx of fats coming in.
Well, and is this like a calorie tracked, like calorie counting diet, or is this like you could use
like the bodybuilder typically go up and down with their calories, so they'll have times where they might be a little bit more unhealthy. And again, I'm not talking about pros because like they do all kinds of crazy stuff, but just kind of in general, you know, they'll bring their calories up a little bit to get a little bit bigger and stronger, and then they'll bring their calories down and so forth. Yeah.
So I mean, I think that can totally work. And I think there was an interesting idea is that exercise, back to the FGF21 point, to like just nail this home, exercise also induces FGF21. And the reason why I think that happens is that after you exercise, your muscles become transiently insulin sensitive, and then protein goes into your cells in an insulin dependent manner. So then what happens after you exercise, even if you've eaten protein, is that your muscles sop up all of your protein, and then your liver now sees basically no protein, and it sees whatever fats and sugar is left in your blood. So then you get this FGF21 response just from lifting. So then the people who are eating like a bodybuilding type diet and have like a high protein diet, like in effect, they're eating kind of like a lower protein diet. It's just that the protein is being disappeared by your muscles. Like when you pair it with lifting. And I think like the
interesting way of wording it, because I have made statements like that in the past of saying like, I almost think that protein calories are free, and especially free for those who lift, because you need that for your repair.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been studies, and I think by like the Lemming Lab and a few other diet researchers, where they give mice high protein diets and they pretty reliably see the things like insulin resistance and these like negative metabolic parameters that you get. But then whenever they give them kind of at least some exercise, they generally have like slightly better metabolic parameters, but they also have like a much lower body weight. So you can actually induce obesity in mice by giving them too much protein, but that's reversed by making them exercise. Whereas with some other diets, like a standard American diet, like high sugar, high fat, high protein, even exercise doesn't reverse the obesity for that. But specifically for protein, exercise can reverse protein-induced obesity, which is it's a weird topic, right? So like maybe somebody who is not lifting shouldn't eat a huge amount of protein, but if you're lifting, then maybe you should.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for everything today. You're starting a podcast. You're going to be promoting that on a YouTube channel or where else?
Right. Yeah. My YouTube channel, Anabology. The podcast is going to be on all platforms. It's called the Counter Narrative Division. The idea is I'm going to start with just like these diet things that I've been promoting a lot, but the unique skill that I have is just like autistically remembering papers from 40 years ago. So I'm going to talk about just science in general, and they're generally going to be Huberman Lab type, long form, hour and a half talks about just like different scientific topics.
Still anonymous?
I guess I could face docs today. I don't know, because
whatever you're comfortable with. I think it's kind of cool that you've been anonymous. It's like, who is this guy? Right. And then you speak so well, it like is irrelevant, you know. And I think it's kind of neat, because I think the avatar someone has, you know, it means way too much to people, and the information that people have is like, is this information useful? Is this guy, you know, saying something that stacks up against, you know, previous science or previous beliefs and thoughts that I have? But, you know, people tend to want to dwell on like whether someone's like shredded or not.
Right. Yeah. No, it's like hard. I mean, I think that's if you are constantly like posting physique, then you never get to do the failed experiment, because then once you get fat, everyone's going to be mad at you. I mean, you see this with like Mike Israel, right?
Right.
People are just like dogging on him right now, but
yeah, he's getting crushed.
So it's like, that could be tough, like psychologically and for his brand and everything. But I mean, but that doesn't like change the quality of his information, right? His like transient physique. So, it's like, I definitely recommend to people that if they want to start like a Twitter or start some thing where they think they have good ideas, but like maybe they're shy with their face or physique or something, and maybe they're censoring themselves because of their job. Just like make an anonymous account and post your ideas out there, and then see where it goes. And eventually, the issue of like the issues that you're running into there will probably vanish, and you're not going to be afraid to show who you are. So
yeah, I'm definitely going to listen to those podcasts, and what you have on your YouTube channel already is dynamite. You already have, I mean, you don't have that much stuff yet, but from the stuff I heard, even just listening to the first couple minutes of a few of them, I was like, holy shit, it's fun to find, people always talk about like going down the rabbit hole, but it's fun to find the rabbit hole of the rabbit hole and try to figure out whether a hole has, whether it's, or whether like, a hole like that has a whole nother side to it that you just never even thought of. And that's been my journey so far with some of this. And I knew about like Ray Pete, and I heard, some of what he said years ago, but they're usually just a short little YouTube clips of him like on the park bench and stuff like that. And I wasn't able to grasp everything he was talking about. There were some things he would talk about, like, carrots helping to, detoxify the body from like phytoestrogens. And he talked a lot about cortisol and carbohydrates helping with cortisol. So I definitely got some of that stuff down. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I need to actually pay attention to some of this. But then as he went, a little further into like more details, I didn't fully understand or grasp exactly what he's talking about. I knew he was a gem, but I didn't know to the degree. And then now, he passed, I think, just maybe within the last couple months, right?
Like years, but yeah, he passed pretty recently. Yeah,
maybe a couple years ago or something like that. Yeah, and since his passing, it's like his everything has kind of grown. His audience has grown, and his information is spreading even more.
Yeah, no, it's great. He was a great visionary. He was one of the OG researchers in aging, and talked about things 50 years before they're gaining traction now. Yeah, I don't know if Ray Pete would approve of these like sugar fasts that we're doing, because he might think it's stressful to the liver. And he did recommend to eat like kind of balanced meals with protein and carbs and fat together. So this is definitely like a little bit post Pete, but his whole thing was to perceive, think, and act. So just as long as we're thinking and not just doing things blindly.
I would say that this is, it's important for people to understand this is like a weight loss strategy, right? And then sometimes when you have a weight loss strategy, not every single piece of that puzzle is in regards to the best interest of your health, because it's just hard to cover. It's like if you're going to compete in something, you're going to power lift, or you're going to bodybuild or something like, or jujitsu, like all these things are great to do. But they start to become more dangerous the more aggressive that you want to be with them, or if you want to compete in them. And the same thing here with a diet. The more specific a diet is, the more it targets something, the more it's probably leaving something else out of the picture.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was awesome.